Right now, I am midway through the sequel to a high fantasy that I put off reading for almost a year. But the story pulled me in so much that I was seriously very glad that the second book was already on my shelf. However, today I am not talking about that one. As with the last few episodes, I am adding a second, shorter review into the mix, so stay tuned to the end for that one. It's very different, but then I do like a wide variety of genres, so that shouldn't come as any surprise. Anyway, less of that, let's get on with the chunky review for the fortnight. This week I am travelling with a reluctant bride, an agitated groom, and a very angry best friend to a kingdom far away. The prize is trust, there could be a lot of victims, and the risk is war. This week, join me, Jory, Kai, and Asher as we journey from Estranza to Incendar in Brigid Kemmerer's debut adult novel, Warrior, Princess, Assassin. I'm Ray, an unapologetic bookworm introvert, self-confessed hermit, and long-time depression sufferer. This is my quiet space to share thoughts as I make my way through an ever-growing to-be-read pile. Join me as I explore stories one book at a time with 100% honest and completely spoiler-free reviews. Welcome to my world and enjoy the stay. Fates collide and passions ignite in New York Times bestselling author Brigid Kemmerer's steamy adult fantasy debut about three characters torn between chasing, betraying, and craving each other. A princess caught between duty and desire, the fearsome warrior king she's promised to, and the assassin now tasked with hunting them down. Warrior. King Maddox Chironan's fire magic has earned him a ruthless reputation on the battlefield, but now his land is slowly burning. Kai's only chance to save his people is to enter a marriage alliance with the neighbouring nation of Estranza and hope that their royal family's power to manipulate the weather will help his kingdom flourish once more. He just needs to ensure no one finds out how this blaze began. Princess. With enemies advancing on Estranza, Princess Jory's home needs the protection of the fearsome warrior king, but she is hiding a dangerous secret. Her family's magic is fading. Tempting as it is to reject her duties and run away with her childhood friend Asher, Jory knows that she is the kingdom's last hope. When she meets her intended, Jory is surprised to discover that beneath Kai's daunting exterior is a compassionate and sharp-witted man who sets her heart aflame. But what will he do when he realizes she's deceiving him? Assassin. Asher's done what he must to survive, even if that means getting his hands dirty. Once a young nobleman in Estranza's palace where he and Jory caused mischief together, now he is part of the Hunters' Guild, employing much darker skills. When a lucrative job comes his way, Asher can't say no, until he discovers the targets. Someone wants Kai and Jory dead. With the guild watching, Asher must decide what he's willing to do to protect the woman he loves. A tale of three complex characters torn between chasing, betraying, and craving each other, Warrior, Princess, Assassin marks the beginning of a thrilling new fantasy trilogy filled with enchantment, adventure, and passionate romance. This week, I am actually going to be trying something a little bit different. Normally, right here, I do a nice long summary of the story so you get an idea if you haven't read it already. And while I have been doing it this way for an eternity, well, almost 5 years on the 15th of September, I am going to cut that bit out and get straight to the nitty-gritty, the review itself. Of course, I am also going to be talking about the plot, the characters, their experiences, and the story. And I am still going to maintain my no spoilers please, I'm British attitude, so I don't ruin everything for you about the story and everything that goes on, because there's nothing worse than getting it completely spoiled if you haven't picked it up yet. I know that I say this every single episode, but it remains the truth and it bears repeating. I am not telling you about these books to influence you into reading something you have no interest in. If you want to read the book and have already considered it after everything I have to say, then that's great. However, I know that not every book is for everyone. Sometimes it can be great to step out of your comfort zone, but other times that zone is there for a reason. There are a few genres I'm not particularly fond of reading, and I am always honest about that. I have stepped out of my personal comfort zone a time or two, and it's just further reinforced my view that certain genres are not for me. So I will occasionally dip my toe in with a new author, but for the most part, I will stay in my lane. Though, to be fair, that lane is pretty wide. Anyway, I'm going to get on with the comparisons because I think that it's important to see things from every angle, and both ends, the 5 and the 1 star reviews, give you a balanced perspective that isn't mine. Tiffany really didn't warm to the book, but at least she finished it. She wasn't keen on the story or the characters and gave it a 1 star rating, saying, "All the marketing was sure to say this was not a YA book. This is her adult debut, not YA, not YA, not YA. If that is true, then why do all these characters act like they are 15 years old? They have no logical reasoning skills, no communication skills. Jory, what a name by the way, is the most naive, annoying, useless FMC. You cannot convince me that these characters are supposed to be 25, 26, 28 years old, or whatever age they are. This is not a fantasy book either. There is no world building. I couldn't even begin to explain the magic system because it's not explained at all in the book. There's basically no plot. There are characters wanting to sleep with each other. That's it. If the author wanted to write a book about a throuple, she'd have just written a romance book about a throuple. That's clearly what she wanted. There's nothing wrong with writing romance novels. Just own it and move on. Although I would suggest writing more mature characters so it doesn't seem like you're writing scenes about 16-year-olds. Suffice to say, I will not be reading the next one." I love looking through reviews once I've read a book. I really do. And sometimes I will use those reviews to find recommendations for other books. Looking through Tiffany's other reads, it appears that we do have some likes and dislikes in common, though there are some differences when it comes to fantasy and romantasy novels, including Caraval, Ruthless Vows, and The Book of Doors. But as I always say, everyone is different, and not everyone will love or loathe exactly the same art as you. It's subjective. On Goodreads, the overall rating for the book is 4.1, and on Storygraph, it's a bit higher at 4.3, which is one of the biggest differences we've seen in this particular genre. Warrior Princess Assassin was released just a couple of weeks ago, as I record this at the end of August. At the moment, the book has 2,524 ratings and 1,217 full reviews on Goodreads, and over on Storygraph it has a total of 687 reviews. I have to be honest, though, this surprises me. The press prior to the release of this book was pretty strong, yet the number of reviews and ratings on the various platforms doesn't bear this out at all. When compared with other books in the romantasy and fantasy genres, including Shield of Sparrows, Fourth Wing, and the ACOTAR books, the reviews following release were in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands. I think Fourth Wing and Onyx Flame right now are at 1.8 million reviews or something. It's absolutely absurd and mind-blowing when you look at it. There could be many reasons for this, from people choosing not to record a rating on sites like Goodreads and Storygraph to people simply not having read it yet. Whatever the reason, I will be checking back in a month to see whether the story changes, because this is an incredible contrast to other books that have come out in a similar time span and the incredible number of reviews that they have garnered. Megan gave the book an incredibly enthusiastic and emphatic 5 stars, having greatly enjoyed the read. She said, Oh my god, the way this book was so much fun. Hear me out. I'm going to be upfront and honest right away that there is not much that happens in this book until towards the end. But I think this was such a good and fun way to set up this trilogy. It's an introduction to the world, magic, characters, and plot without it being extremely overwhelming, the way 99% of fantasies are these days. It allows you to get comfortable and familiar without too much pressure to keep up with 10 billion things. Every single character in this book was extremely pleasant and intriguing. I'm very obsessed with the three main characters and the dynamic that they're attempting to figure out. I really liked all of Kai's men who surrounded him, and I'm very much looking forward to learning more about Kai's sister. The traitor is a tad predictable, but I'll give it a pass because I just really had the best time reading this. I am pumped that it seems to be setting up for MMF. I am on my knees praying that this is the direction the books will continue in, because all three of these characters have the most ridiculous tension and chemistry. This is my first of Brigid's, and I am so deeply impressed by this book, as I know her previous works of YA. Her writing had me in an absolute chokehold. I really enjoyed how she uses everyone's favourite fantasy tropes, but in a way that isn't overdone or cliché. The explicit scenes were hot. I absolutely loved how exploratory they were. I'm very excited to see how the dynamics shift in this aspect throughout the next two books. I'm excited to see Jory get more confident with her two men and how Kai and Asher will eventually find their groove with one another. The tension and yearning throughout the entire book build up so stunningly, like when I can get my hands on book 2, Prepare to Hate, because I'm going to be feral by the time it happens all over the waiting. I'm just overall very excited to see where the story goes. There is nothing I love more than an engaging fantasy where I love all the characters, and it doesn't require me to be constantly using my brain to keep up with everything. Just chef's kiss. Right. Now I've mentioned what other people are saying, here's what I really think about Warrior Princess Assassin by Brigid Kemmerer. No spoilers, just me being 100% honest. Did I like the book? Again, using that word, I have to be honest right here. I didn't read the summary before I purchased the book, nor did I read it before I slipped off the dust jacket and sank into the story. So to say that I was startled when I realised that it was about three individuals, a warrior, a princess, and an assassin, may be something of an understatement. Here I was, innocently picking the book up, admiring the beautiful sprayed edges of my Waterstones special edition, seriously, it's stunning, and thinking, oh, I wonder what will make this character into the warrior and the assassin, only to discover that I was so far off the mark it was pretty comical. In fact, several people did laugh at me for my stupid assumptions. As you may have realised from the reviews I've already talked about, and the book Précis, Jory is the princess of Astranza, which I keep on pronouncing as AstraZeneca in my head for some reason, a woman considered useful for nothing more than a successful marriage to join two kingdoms together. However, as the story develops, you find that Jory is conflicted. She has been dealt something of a rubbish hand, okay, not something of a massive rubbish hand by her older, domineering and incredibly cruel brother Dane, who I constantly wished would get killed, the crown prince and the current regent. Having been fed stories for years about the brutality of the king of Incendar, the man she is to marry, she's horrified at the thought that her brother is determined that they will seal the union between Astranzar and Incendar, and that's perfectly understandable. To her, King Maddox Chironan is a man who tortures and kills his own people, and she is being sent to live in a kingdom where everyone lives in fear for their lives. Of course, this doesn't stop her from trying to discover the truth on her own, and she shows moments of rebellion throughout, including dressing up as a maid to get closer to the king and his men upon their arrival at her home. For a large portion of the novel, Jory is portrayed as guileless, innocent, and unaware of the truth outside the high walls of the palace. Though some of the criticism is fair, it's also a little simplistic. As a princess, she is a prisoner, often locked in her room, hidden away from the people, the truth kept from her ears. While the people are suffering, being treated as less than human, she has no idea. It could be said that she could learn of these things, she could steal away from the palace and find out what is going on, but she trusts the people she is surrounded with, to a degree anyway, and even when the opportunity to tell the truth has been presented, I see you there, Asha, it is kept from her and the subject is changed. Asha is the assassin, once Jory's best friend, her partner in rather innocent crime. He was exiled from the palace following the assassination of Jory and Dane's mother. I have some theories on that one, but it could be considered a spoiler to reveal them. And sentenced to a life of slavery, something which, even when the opportunity presents itself, he does not share with Jory. He is a member of the Hunters Guild, a skilled assassin paid to kill people. Every once in a while, he finds his way to Jory's side, and they share moments of tenderness, though he shields his emotions and shies away from her touch as though fearful she will be polluted by the man he has become. On the eve of Jory's wedding to the king, Asha discovers that both she and her husband-to-be are in the sights of the guild, and two different people, at least that's how it appears, have paid for their demise. Terrified for his friend, he attempts to get her out of the palace, revealing to the reader that his one true vulnerability is the young princess. But she's equally stubborn and won't leave without a man she barely knows. He's shown her momentary kindness, and therefore she feels that he deserves the right to be protected. The moment when Jory convinces Asha that they have to take the king, when he is encouraging her to escape the palace, is actually one of my favourites. It has minor streaks of comedy, and you can sense the frustration, irritation and anger from the three very different people as they realise that they're kind of stuck in a situation that none of them want. This is also the moment where you see for the first time that though he is reluctant, Asha is unable to ignore Jory's wishes and feelings. He is doing something to save her life, and if that means going along with an absolutely insane plan, he will do it. Though it's kind of as though it's sort of like, I'll do this, but because I just want you to stop. There are times in the book where my heart broke for Asha, just a little bit. His face and body bear the evidence of the cruelty he was exposed to following his exile, sold into slavery, forced to do unspeakable acts in order to survive, and feeling unable to share these horrors with the one person he always returns to, for fear that to reveal the truth would push her away, or at least create doubt, because she's never had any reason to not believe the stories she's been fed. Asha is conflicted. He's clearly in love with Jory, though he will likely deny it until his dying breath. But there is something about the king that he finds himself unable to ignore. His confusion is clear and actually contributes to the tension that has been building since the first few chapters. And then there is King Maddox Chironan, Kai to his friends. He's the one I actually, being honest, feel the most confused about. He's not the brute that Dane and his stories would have you believe, but it's clear there is something rather dire that he is hiding behind the laughing and joking he does with his friends and the soldiers. He actually serves as a soldier. He leads the army, but not from a tower like Dane quite often will do. There does appear to be a moment of insta attraction when he initially spies Jory, and he is immediately protective of her when Dane appears to try and discipline her, threatening the regent with a withdrawal from the union if he doesn't treat Jory with respect. Did this annoy me? A little bit, but it was good to see that this brutal and cruel king was not the man palace talk and the stories would have you believe. He shows concern for the woman who is to be his wife, a woman he's never met before, and the bond he shares with his men makes it clear that he is not as heartless as Jory feared he would be. There were times when I felt as though I were watching a speedy tennis rally. Moods and motives changed so swiftly. One moment, Asher is convincing Jory to leave the palace. The next, they have tied Kai up and both are taking him through a tunnel leading outside the palace walls. Emotions were flip-flopping, which is why I think perhaps Tiffany felt it was the characters were portrayed as much younger than they were, that emotional instability that you tend to somewhat grow away from. I wouldn't say grow out of, because there are moments where hormones and emotions are high and you will act like you're 16 again because you've got no control over yourself, and that happens to everybody. Speaking as a woman going through perimenopause, tempers are high quite often. It's clear from the outset that Jory has great affection, possibly great attraction for Asher. And then she's considering Kai, then Asher, then Kai. I get the confusion. Both are described as incredibly attractive men, but there were moments where I wanted her to pick a lane and stay in it. Just for my sanity, because at this point, I still didn't realise what I was getting myself into. It took me a while to realise that this was sort of the intention. Get you so confused that by the time the end game is actually revealed, you're like, oh, well, okay then. The connection between the three characters develops over time, and due to the events that they experience together, they are a sum of their individual parts, each making the others stronger because of what they bring to the party. Occasionally, I found myself irritated with Jory and her seeming inability to read the room. I know that her character was written this way to juxtapose the more worldly wise and experienced male characters, her innocence a foil for their darker characteristics. But it would have been nice to see elements of experience or awareness in her character occasionally. That having been said, I think that it was necessary to have a somewhat angelic and naive character who appears almost incapable of considering the darker side of things in order to create an element of balance. If all three of the main characters had been innocent or too aware of the world, it would be less about a journey of growth and more of an outright bedroom fest than a story with a sometimes intricate and complex plot. I have read a lot of fantasy novels, and while some, including my current read, focus entirely on the fantasy element, with any relationships as a second or third plot element that plays a very small role in the overall story arc, when it comes to Warrior Princess Assassin, this is not the case. Now, here's a disclaimer, though hopefully it won't be necessary. You know, I pride myself on ensuring that this is a very family-friendly podcast with no cursing, minimal mentions of anything related to the bedroom, apart from duvet days, cozy nightwear, and reading at night. But this book is going to test my limits. As Megan's 5-star review highlighted, this novel contains a considerable amount of adult content, with the relationship being a core part of the story. Warrior Princess Assassin is about the individual characters, Kai, Jory, and Asher, and the way that they grow as people while they are discovering the true nature of their situation, not only emotionally but politically and regarding their own country's stability. But it's also about Kai, Jory, and Asher as they learn about each other in a definitely not PG sense. If you want to look at it from a trope perspective, this novel would be classed as a story with a why choose romance. The relationship between Asher, Jory, and Kai is not a traditional love triangle, where we have one woman or man at the peak of the triangle and two other individuals vying for their affections, often culminating with one of the three being hurt because they end up on the outside looking at the bond growing between the other two. This story is a consensual and emotional polyamorous bond between all three characters, something you can see developing from quite early on in the story if you're not oblivious me. This trope has become more popular over the last few years, with several darker romances featuring a triad at its core. I am far more familiar, as many will be, with the love triangle trope, having read it in novels like ACOTAR, Fourth Wing, Hunger Games, and Twilight. Does this mean that I didn't enjoy this particular aspect? Not at all. Witnessing the growth of this bond as the trio journeyed together from Astranza to Incendar, battling assassins, unhappy villagers, and emotionally each other, was actually entertaining. The relationship also leans considerably on a few more tropes: forced proximity and poor communication. I have mentioned several times in past episodes that the latter trope irritates me, actually a lot, especially when it's used as a third act twist in romantic comedies. In Warrior Princess Assassin, it's an issue from the very beginning. Misunderstandings run amok when it comes to these three characters and those who surround them. It's as though poor communication could be considered their love language. I did grow a little tired when it felt as though they were permanently and purposefully creating issues for each other because they wanted to protect themselves from emotional damage. But all they needed was a proper conversation and to be honest with each other. Seriously, that's all it takes. Honestly, the forced proximity and there's only one bed tropes that often find their way into the world of romantasy don't tend to bother me as much as poor communication and misunderstandings do, though they can be problematic if they lead to miscommunication. If they're handled correctly, they are the perfect stepping off point to push characters into realizing their feelings. In Warrior Princess Assassin, the forced proximity had a clear purpose. It was all down to kidnapping and getting to know you. I know I may somewhat be reaching with the second one, but it was something that happened, so I'm sure you'll give me some leeway, right? The final nail in the romantasy bed frame is slow burn, and this book has that in spades. Though it's actually a relatively short novel, in fact it's under 400 pages in the special edition, the book seems to be constantly building towards something. Both our male leads, Kai and Asher, are protective and jealous, intrigued and infatuated, and this leads to some interesting moments where you can see they are testing each other to see how far to push the boundaries that they have set in this odd little dance around Jory and each other. Though Jory is the innocent and pure one in this situation, a lot of her own curiosity is what leads to things moving further than they probably would if this were another of Kemmerer's YA novels. She is infatuated with both men, and while she has little understanding of what that could lead to, she isn't adverse to taking a few steps on the wild side to see what happens next. She is part ingenue and part femme fatale, though the femme fatale bit is buried quite deep. And I love the way that you see this particular development emerge on the page. I've experienced several slow burn novels, including When Gracie Met the Grump by the apparent queen of the slow burn, Mariana Zapata. However, I never felt like there was any growth or development when it came to the romance or the payoff in that book, especially considering it was over 600 pages long. It was a novel that I didn't feel provided enough of a reward to justify its length, whereas with Warrior Princess Assassin, it was under 400 pages and still managed to develop this slow burn anticipation. Anyway, less of that. I guess it all comes down to this. Will I read the next one in the trilogy? Yes, I am curious to see where we head to next, and not just with the romance. I want to see if we get more character building, more story, more revelations, and I really do want to see if I'm right about my plot theory when it comes to Jory and Dane's mum. The biggest challenge, I think, when it comes to romantasy is this. Does it offer the reader enough outside of the romantic relationship? Does it have political intrigue, world building, character growth outside of the romance? Do I want to learn more? Find out where the story grows after the culmination of hundreds of pages of wistful glances? Or is it all about what happens in the bedroom, as Tiffany mentioned in her review? For me, this book seemed to provide enough balance to make me want to know where things go next, not only when it comes to who they love, but also with the political conflict, the deceit, the betrayal, and the secrets still hidden. I have to admit that even after reading, I still can't believe I was waiting for the princess to become a warrior and an assassin. though to be honest, that would have made a good book. If you enjoyed Warrior Princess Assassin or want to read something similar, try these. Romantasy has, over the last few years, grown to almost overshadow its parent genre. That's not to say that there aren't hundreds of fantasy novels published weekly, but when it comes to marketing, I can't help but notice romantasy has almost taken over. I only need to look at the books that are being added to most anticipated reads lists, and the fact that it has been added as a category in its own right on websites and reading platforms. That being the case, I am going to take a look at the romantasy novels that I have read and enjoyed over the last few years and recommend them. Well, some of them, because the list could get very long. Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, the first two books in the Empyrean series by Rebecca Yarros. While neither of these are actually 5-star reads for me, they are pretty close. And in fact, I think on Goodreads they might be 5-star because they don't have half-star ratings. They really need to get them. I enjoyed the first two books in the series, and part of me is looking forward to seeing what Amazon manages to do with it on screen, but they really do have to get the casting right. So why didn't I say the first 3 books? I'm not sure what it is, but for some reason, I simply didn't enjoy Onyx Storm as much. Ending the book with more questions than I started with and finding no answers along the way caused more frustration than satisfaction. But please do not come for me, because this is a personal view. And I still gave it a 3.75. It just didn't quite get up there for me. The Crowns of Nyaxia series by Carissa Broadbent has to be on the list. Though I do have to add a disclaimer here and admit that I didn't find the second books in either of the completed duets to be as strong as their lead-ins. The Serpent and the Wings of Night and The Songbird and the Heart of Stone were both solid reads introducing strong characters and interesting relationships. I can't wait to read the first book in the House of Blood duet, as I am sure that I know who the next male love interest is going to be. I just haven't figured out who his partner will be yet. Shield of Sparrows by Devney Perry needs to be on the list. While I know it wasn't a hit with everyone, I personally devoured it in a day and could happily have continued reading. To find out what I thought, though, check out my episode about it, and I will post the link in the notes. Another romantasy that I've spoken about on the podcast is The Games Gods Play by Abigail Owen. For all you UK readers out there who've been waiting for it to become available, it is ready for pre-order at many online stores now, thanks to the introduction of Red Tower Books via Penguin. Combining characters from Greek mythology with an alternative universe, San Francisco, this one was an entertaining read, and I am looking forward to my US copy of the second book in the series, which should be winging its way across the Atlantic relatively soon, I hope. I know that there are so many more books I could list, but these are the ones I have devoured most recently, and the ones with the best star ratings on my lists. As I said, these are all my personal opinions, and I am sure that if you asked somebody else, they would come up with a totally different list. Over the last few weeks, I have read a number of books that had been on my radar for a while, but hadn't yet made it onto my shelves for some reason. Seeking out something light-hearted and entertaining, I returned to a favourite author of old who had taken a step down the path to a new genre, that of romantic comedy. I first read Kelly Armstrong back in 2001 when her first supernatural novel, Bitten, was released into the world. In those days, the internet was a very different place where authors set up websites and monitored their own forums. I spent a lot of time talking with other fans of the book, and Kelly occasionally made a visit to the forums too. And as we discussed characters and their possible story development on the forum, it was just, as I said, a totally different time. But that is a tale for another day. For I found my way back to Armstrong with her recent romantic comedy offerings, Finding Mr. Right and Writing Mr. Wrong. I have to say that I did not realise both books were connected, even though the titles are similar, and I ended up reading the second book first. But I am going to talk about the first book, Finding Mr. Right. In this book, we are introduced to Daphne, a writer who, unable to sell her zombie novel, decides, while drunk, that she will change things up a bit, amend the book blurb, and try and sell the book under a male pseudonym. It works. Zane Remington succeeds where Daphne McFadden has failed, highlighting an issue with the publishing world that she had long suspected but wished she wasn't right about. Things move smoothly until her novel becomes a bestseller. Bookstores are clamouring for a tour, chat shows want interviews, and her agent is desperate for Zane to appear in public. Of course, there's one massive problem. Zane doesn't exist. So Daphne does what any sensible woman in this situation would do. No, she doesn't come clean. She hires straight-laced accountant Chris Stanton to play at being Zane, taking the credit for her best-selling novel and doing all the public appearances that she can't do. If there are misunderstandings along the way, including the fact that Chris has his own secrets, then we've got all the makings of a classic rom-com, complete with forced proximity, misunderstandings, and the cliched third act twist. I found glimmers of the writing I have grown familiar with over the last 2 decades in this book, in the character development and the witty repartee between them, but it still felt a little like I was stepping onto unsteady rocks when I realised there would be no supernatural elements, no curses, no spells, no magical community or a pack of wolves. That said, this book was an enjoyable one, and though I read it after I had read the newer Writing Mr. Wrong, which I think was actually a slightly stronger book, knowing how things ended up because of the sequel didn't affect my enjoyment, and while other newer books have found their way onto the unhaul pile after the last week or so, this isn't actually going to be one of them. Overall, would I recommend Finding Mr. Right by Kelly Armstrong? Yes, it did exactly what I wanted it to, cleanse my palate in time for the next heavy-duty fantasy. If you enjoy light-hearted romantic comedies, then this one is not exactly a must-read, but it is a reliable refresher that won't take too long to get through. And knowing that there is a second book in the series, if you love the characters, you really will love the second book, because I think personally I preferred the characters in it, but that's just me. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. If you're enjoying the show, why not share it with your friends or family, and please leave a star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, because it really does help get the podcast out there. I've been going nearly 5 years now, and I love doing this every fortnight. I did love doing it every week, but work and life in general. So I really would love it if you would share and help get this podcast out there. You can find me on Instagram at beingbookishpod, on X at being_bookish, and on TikTok at beingbookishreviews. I really do need to post something on there. Prefer reading? Head to beingbookish.co.uk for spoiler-free reviews, my 2025 reading tracker, and all the links in one place. My next episode is going to be my 5-year anniversary, and I will be speaking with author Heidi Swain about her brand new, very autumn-themed novel, All Wrapped Up, which is released on the 11th of September. Until next time, this is me saying farewell.